Welcome to Bhatt and Bhatt Tutorials. I am Sheshadri, Faculty for Social Science. This session is for 10th grade ICSE Social Science. The lesson we are doing is History. Dear students, we have already finished the first chapter, that is the first war of independence. And this one, we will be looking at the next chapter, which is factors promoting nationalism and foundation of the Indian National Congress. This is as given in one textbook, that is the Avichal Publishers textbook, or growth of nationalism as given in the Morningstar publication textbook. So let us see how growth of nationalism happened in the case of India. Now, factors promoting the growth of nationalism, dear students, in this chapter, when we look at it, the events after the first war of independence till, say, the formation of the Indian National Congress in 1885. This chapter covers up to that. Further, nationalism, how it grew, the early nationalists and assertive nationalism will be there in the chapters that follow. So, what are the factors that promoted the growth of nationalism? They are listed like this. First one is the economic exploitation by the British. Then the repressive colonial policies of the British. Socio-religious reform movements which were started by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Jyotiba Phule. It was these socio-religious reform movements also which promoted the growth of nationalism. Rediscovery of India's part, where a certain society was formed to highlight the richness of the Indian culture and India's heritage. So these things also promoted the growth of nationalism. Then you have influence of Western education. By Western education, what happened was people, whoever were getting educated there, they not only got to know the movements in India, but they also got a comparison of what is happening elsewhere in the world. How the French movement happened, how the Italian movement happened. Those things also started influencing whoever were taking part, who were attending those schools and graduating from there. Role of the press. Basically, at that point of time, newspaper, the printed media was the only main source of communication, because telegraph itself was only for short messages, that too limited to only the postal office with short messages. So a mass media available to the public was the print media, which was in the form of a newspaper. So this also had a very significant role of the press. Modern means of transport and communication. It was the railways which revolutionized the movement of people across the country. And when the things started picking up, when the movement for independence started picking up, the railways also contributed immensely to it. So let us look at the first one, the economic factors responsible for the growth of nationalism. Now, agricultural India was made an economic colony to serve the interests of industrial England. As with any other colony, it was only excess food grains that were being sent out of India. There was no produce here. Suppose there was a failure of rain or there was a drought, there was widespread famine. So India was basically like a colony to serve the interests of industrial England. This led to a lot of hardship to the people there. Then India was made to accept ready-made British goods either duty-free or at nominal duty, while Indian products were subjected to high import duties in England. Definitely, high import duties in England killed the market for Indian products, and it badly affected our handloom industry, our handicraft industry, and the entire group of people who were associated with the industry here in India. The third one, the British capital, that is money, was invested in Indian market, especially in railways, shipping, oil exploration, tea and coffee plantations, was used to get huge profits, and these profits were sent to England. See, whatever was the earning that was coming out of India, that earning was eventually being sent back to England. It was never being used for the improvement of the country itself. So that was what was one of the negative aspects there in whatever money the British were investing. The export of raw materials and food grains deprived the country of her agricultural surplus and raised the price of raw materials. The bare minimum stocks even would not be available. And suppose there was most of the agriculture there was rain-fed. Irrigation was not yet developed at that point of time. So whatever rain-fed agriculture, in case rains failed in a particular year, there was no agricultural surplus available because the entire raw material was being exported. And the remaining raw material, obviously, because the demand would be high, the prices would go up and become unmanageable to the local people here. The salaries and allowances of the English who served in the administration and the army were paid out from Indian resources. We have seen even in the Sepoy mutiny or in the first war of independence, the salaries of Britishers were very high compared to what was being paid to the Indians. The salary of a Subedar, the highest post which a Indian Sepoy could go up to, would be equivalent to the entry-level salary of a Britisher. So the salaries also was a drain. So the drain included the salaries, income and savings of the Englishmen, and the British expenditure in India on the purchase of military goods, office establishment, interest on debts, unnecessary expenditure on the army. Because from then on, wherever wars were fought, alongside the other borders of India, the army that was present in India was to be invested with the money from India. So that was a drain on our country's economy. So these were the economic aspects. If we look at the next aspect, these were repressive colonial policies. Now in 1877, a grand Delhi Darbar was organized by Lord Lytton, which proclaimed Queen Victoria as the Empress of India. This happened at a time when there was a huge famine in South and Southwestern India. In Mysore, Hyderabad, all these areas, there was a famine. There was total shortage of food, and people had absolutely, they were starving. Again, because there was no excess raw material, excess agricultural surplus available. So lakhs of rupees were spent on this event, but nothing was done for Indians who were in the grip of a famine. That's in South and the entire South India actually. Mysore, Hyderabad, Madras. These three presidencies was where this famine had happened then. So that was something which was reckless, we can say. Lord Lytton introduced the Vernacular Press Act in 1878, which forbade vernacular. Vernacular is local languages other than English. Any language, Hindi, Marathi, Bengali, Kannada, all these are called vernacular languages. So this Vernacular Press Act, it forbade vernacular papers to publish any material that might be against the British government. This was not applicable to papers, newspapers in English, because that they could easily see and censor, whereas they would not understand what was written in local languages. So that is why this act was brought in. The second one which he brought was the Indian Arms Act 1879, also introduced by Lord Lytton, made it a criminal offence for Indians to carry arms without license. Britishers here could carry arms. They did not need a license. Whereas if Indians were to carry arms, they needed a license. So this again was repressive, because at that point of time, it should have been an equal playing ground, but it was not the case. So these were the repressive colonial policies, again, which led people to revolt against the British government. The maximum age limit for the Indian civil service was reduced from 21 to 19 years. So it was by 19 only the European educated people, Britishers or even Indians who were educated in Europe could make it at to the graduation level by age 19. So this reduction from 21 to 19 years made it difficult for Indians to compete for it, to enter into the civil services, to enter into top positions in IAS, IPS, IFS, all the services that are there. The import duties on British textiles were removed. It is a part economic cause also, and also their repressive policy there. It proved harmful for the Indian industry. No import duty. So obviously, the British textile will be much cheaper. It will be even cheaper than khadi, which is locally produced, because they will mass produce in Britain. Raw material would come from India. They would mass produce it in Britain, bring and dump it back in India without an import duty. So it would be available cheap. So the local industry would totally be harmed because of that. Socio-religious reform movements. This is another aspect. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was one of the greatest social and religious reformers of the 19th century, who established the Brahmo Sabha in 1828, which was later renamed as Brahmo Samaj. Raja Ram Mohan Roy is also called as the father of modern India, because not just social and religious reform, even politically, he opposed the British. So, in a way, he is like the father of the Renaissance movement of India. If the political Renaissance, if it's a new movement that was to come, he is one of the pioneers there. The Brahmo Samaj believed in monotheism or worship of one God. Basically, all these social reformers, they were against the caste system. They were against sati, and they were for the remarriage of widows. Based on these people's recommendations is when the law against sati and widow remarriage was framed by the British. So Indians felt it was the British who were trying to impose it, but actually it was our people who felt that it was a very terrible practice, this practice of sati, where the lady also had to die live along with the husband. The other reformer here was Jyotiba Phule. He was an urban educated member of a so-called low caste. He belonged to the low caste. He was not from the Brahmin or the Kshatriya or the Vaishya caste. So he was a member of the low caste. And because of the discrimination that he saw in the caste, in 1854, he established a school for untouchables and shared a private orphanage for the widows. Widows also were very badly treated. very much ill-treated. It was as though it is the widow's mistake that the husband died. A lot of myths and taboos there. They had to dress totally differently. They had to dress in white. They had to shave off their head, shave off their hair, and wear only white. They were not permitted in any social function. So it was very repressive. So that is why widow remarriage was a very important reform movement that happened. And Jyotiba Phule founded the Satya Shodhak Samaj in 1873 with the aim of securing social justice for the weaker sections of the society. Now, in what ways these socio-religious reform movements, they contributed to the Indian nationalism? Let us have a look at that. Among the other people there were Swami Dayananda Saraswati and Swami Vivekananda. They proclaimed the superiority of the Indian culture and civilization. See, just to comment here, our Vedas, the earliest known date is 5000 BC when it was first written, and much before that, it was passed from teacher to student verbally. The Veda itself was not written. And even today, even if we were to look at the English translation of the Veda, it is very much relevant even today. So there was no way that the Indian culture was anyway inferior to the culture that they thought was very undeveloped. So they both these people, they proclaimed the superiority. The reformers condemned untouchability and the caste system. Thus, they said had to go. The reformers taught people not to ignore the importance of women who could participate in the national movement. This concept we have seen even in Europe, all over the world. This was there. Somehow there was a what should I say, a negative feeling against women getting educated, women coming into politics. The same thing was there even here. But then these reformers said that women also are equally important. They protested against the British domination of India. Swami Dayananda Saraswati was the first to use the word Swaraj and to raise the slogan, India for the Indians. So it was these reformers who first started. Otherwise, till such point of time, people, even the early nationalists, they were only talking of India being ruled as a British colony, but as an independent British dominion, as they call it. But it was the reformers here who felt that it was independence, total independence, that was required for India. The reform movements drew their inspiration from India's cultural heritage and promoted a feeling of pan-Indianism and a spirit of nationalism. Our comment here, our culture is so important. Today we are talking of coronavirus, where you are not supposed to share your food, you are not supposed to share it. Those days, from the beginning, if you see some cultures, they have a concept of keeping food in one plate and all of them eating on the same plate. But in our case, that was not there even from the beginning. So superiority of Indian culture has always been there. Only thing is, the Westerners, in an idea to rule over us, they negated the entire Indian culture. Then the next thing, reform movements created a consciousness of a new society, devoid of privileges based on caste, creed, or religion. So basically, all extra benefits that come due to birth, that has to go, was what these people were insisting. The next point that promoted the growth of nationalism, rediscovery of India. like our reformers did. This was the society. Sir William Jones founded the Asiatic Society of Bengal to encourage Oriental studies. The Asiatic Society got many Indian classics translated into English, and these translations introduced the ancient Indian culture to the Western world. The Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, these were basic classics at that point of time. Though Vedas, they may not have done immediately at that point of time. So our great epics, these were first translated. That showed how rich the administration of India was, how our princely kingdoms were ruled. So all that came into picture. This aspect was also equally important. The influence of the Western education. The British introduced Western education in India through the medium of English to serve their own representatives. They wanted to train Indian people as clerks so as to run their own administration, because they wanted the administrative level help from Indians. So that's why they wanted people to start getting educated in the Western kind of education. The British wanted to rear their culture and conquer the goodwill of the educated Indians, but it produced results which were against their expectations. What happened is, all these educated Indians, they started reading about the happenings all over the world. So that changed the way they started looking at the country itself, INA as a whole. The whole country, which was then divided into small kingdoms, when these people came to trade with us initially. So that feeling was slowly taken over by what we call as pan-Indianism. The entire country was being grouped in one, as one nation. So Western education, through the study of European history, political thought and economic ideas, gave the educated Indians a rational, secular, democratic and national outlook. So all this happened. The slogan, equality, liberty and fraternity, of the American and the French revolutions impressed all the educated Indians. So what happened there in the 18th century was happening here in the 19th century and well into the 20th century also, when we ultimately got independence. So Western education, which they introduced for their purposes, it produced this kind of reverse result, which in which all educated Indians started revolting against the British, because they saw these ideas were there prevalent in other parts of the world. English language played a leading part in this process. It was through this language that Indians from different parts of the country could meet and exchange ideas. Dear students, those days, there were only two ways you could communicate in public. Either you call a public meeting, or it had to be through the newspaper. Now, even now, official scheduled language which we see on our currency note is 15 or 16 scheduled languages are there. Gujarati, Hindi, not Hindi, Marathi, Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, Punjabi, all these. But it was English which was common at that point of time, at least for people who could start reading English and understand English. So English gave them a linguistic unity at that point of time, which also helped them. Through Western education, social and national consciousness of Indians was awakened by the revolutionary ideas of liberal thinkers like Rousseau, Mazzini and Thomas Paine. These were thinkers from the Western world who had promoted ideas of liberty. So the educated Indians started to recognize, and they wanted it to be repeated in India also. Role of the press. In my opinion, a very powerful tool at that point of time. Sorry. A large number of newspapers were started in the later half of the 18th century. Excuse me for a minute. Some of the prominent newspapers were the Amrit Bazar Patrika, the Bengali, the Tribune, the Pioneer, the Times of India, the Hindu, and the Statesman in English. I think most of these papers are still there. As I know, Times of India, Hindu, Statesman, the Tribune. I doubt about the Bengali, but Amrit Bazar Patrika, I think they are still there, which was started there in the 18th century. All these newspapers are still there. So and because the written media was so important in translating ideas and to enable people to think on the same lines, the press played an enormous role in fostering national unity and creating consciousness among the Indians. Now, this we have seen as the under the repressive colonial practices, the Vernacular Press Act forbade the vernacular papers to publish any material against the British government. This act was not applicable to English newspapers, but in 1881 this was repealed by Lord Ripon, and this Vernacular Press Act was taken away. So this was the role of the press. Modern means of transport and communication. The first railway line connecting Mumbai with Thane was laid down in 1853. By 1869, more than 6,000 kilometers of railways had been built, extending to nearly 45,000 by 1905. Though the primary interest in this were for the British, for easy movement of goods, particularly from coastal areas to the hinterland, that is to the inside areas. But this led to easy movement of people at that point of time, where if they wanted to have a gathering in a particular city, you would have the railways for them to provide the necessary transport. So railways also was one of the factors which promoted the growth of nationalism. Besides encouraging trade and commerce, the railways facilitated the growth of nationalism. In fact, one more thing which we can add here is, for instant messages, the telegraph also was there, where you had to urgently convey something. The telegraph also was developed at that point of time. So any urgent messaging that needed to be done could be done using the telegraph. So that was also another means of communication at that point of time. And like we have seen, the newspaper itself is also a very powerful means of communication. In fact, the only means of communication for mass media at that time. So all these together, they contributed a lot towards the growth of nationalism. Now, before the Indian National Congress began, there were some organizations which had started. In fact, in 1883, Surendranath Banerjee convened the All India National Conference at Kolkata. It was a provincial organization. It offered a model to the Indian National Congress, which was formed 2 years later. All these people, Dadabhai Naoroji, Surendranath Banerjee, they are actually, we'll be seeing them in detail in the coming chapters. They are all the early nationalists, people who led the country in the initial stages. So these were associations which were formed to promote ideas of nationalism, ideas of and the revolt against the British. They were happening through these organizations. Dadabhai Naoroji, also known as the Grand Old Man of India, actually he started this in London. The East India Association was founded in London in 1866 by Dadabhai Naoroji. The association provided information on all the Indian subjects to the British citizens and the members of parliament. The association had its branches in Mumbai, Kolkata and Chennai. Dear students, please remember, it was very important for the British Parliament to know what was happening in India, because it was under the crown, it was under the British. So any administrative change that was to take place here had to originate in England. So he started this East India Association so that he could provide information on all the Indian topics to the Britishers. In fact, he was the first one. He was also the first Indian member in the House of Commons then. So he used his political representation there to represent all the things that were happening in India. So these were institutions which happened before the Indian National Congress was itself formed. Next is the formation of the Indian National Congress. Till that point of time, there was not a single big political organization which represented all the aspects of India to the British, nor was a pan-India discussion taking place. So it was with the Indian National Congress, and this was actually done by A.O. Hume. The Indian National Congress was formed by Allan Octavian Hume. A.O. Hume is an Englishman and a retired civil servant. He, in association with various national leaders who called for a conference in Pune in December 1885. So he felt the need, and he first gave the call to the graduates of the Calcutta University, asking them to dedicate themselves to the service of the people by forming this union. So he initially wanted to call it the Indian National Union, which was later changed on the recommendation of Dadabhai Naoroji to Indian National Congress. So he is the one who started this. And from then on, every year the Congress would hold its annual session. So the first Congress session, it was held at Gokuldas Teshpal Sanskrit College, Mumbai, from 28 December to 31st December 1885, under the presidentship of Umesh Chandra Banerjee. These are the spellings. It is here written as Banerjee, but it later came to be known as Banerjee. It is BA as we call them now. Banerjee, Bhattacharya, they are all the same. So they are all Bengali surnames actually. So this first Congress session was attended by 72 delegates. The Viceroy then, at that point, the British Viceroy, Lord Dufferin, favored the formation of the Congress because he wanted it to act as a safety valve for popular discontent thereby safeguarding the British interests in India. Dear students, this was the main difference between these early nationalists and later the assertive nationalists. These early nationalists, they still believe that the British will listen to us. The British will let the Indians, though it will still remain a colony, they will let Indians only do the administration of the entire country. So that is why the Viceroy there, he thought, let the Congress formation happen. And so let it be one place where people will start asking what they want from the government. The prime objectives of the Indian National Congress, as per Umesh Chandra Banerjee, were to promote friendly relations between nationalist political workers from various parts of the countries and to develop the feeling of national unity. Because in the earlier times, it was either the Nizam of Hyderabad fighting for his own kingdom, it was the Mysore kingdom headed by Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan fighting for their own kingdom, it was the Nawab of Awadh, or it was the Maratha king. None of them had ever fought as a nation. So this was one of the primary objectives, that we develop a feeling of national unity, and so that we can initially tell the British what is it that we want. That's what the initial one, Swaraj had not yet begun the feeling for Swaraj had not yet started at that point of time. So that was the initial objectives of the Congress, friendly relations between nationalist political workers from various parts of the country. Wherein you can see actually in the textbook, he is given a list of all the sessions of the Indian National Congress, starting from the first to the 54th in 1946, that is just before independence. Okay, and here we look at only the first and the second, and then further sessions they will refer at a later point of time. So the second Congress session, it was held at Kolkata in 1886. You can see that these sessions were all held once a year. It was an annual session. Every year there has been one. Yeah. Only in 1907, and if you can see that a table that is given in the textbook, the one in 1907 and 1908, both of them are called the 23rd session, because there were some differences among the people there, the early nationalists and the assertive nationalists, and they conducted the session once again the next year, but the number of the session remained the 23rd session. So in this second session, some of the delegates were also received by Lord Dufferin as distinguished visitors to the capital. Actually, truly speaking, the British never realized that this will be the forum on which the entire civil disobedience movement, non-cooperation movement, all the movements would start. They at that point of time did not foresee that. So that is why initially they were very happy with the Congress. The same people, the same British, at a later point of time, they brought in the Rowlatt Act. So many of these things happened, where they started jailing all political prisoners. But initially, this was not the case. So that's why Lord Dufferin, he received all these delegates as distinguished visitors to the capital. The presidency was then in Calcutta. It was the capital of the country itself was in Calcutta at that point of time. The Surat session is given the 23rd session again. Yeah, that's where the dispute happened. That's why it was held in 1907. under the president of Raj Bihari Ghosh, there was a dispute between the early nationalists and the assertive nationalists of the Congress regarding the methods of agitation in Bengal after its partition. See, this was a big. Actually, they were very cunning. These Britishers. Bengal. The reason Bengal was divided was they wanted to have the Hindu-Muslim divide policy then. That is the reason they divided Bengal. And many people in the country, they actually did not want this partition. If Bengal was not divided, Bangladesh itself would not be there today. And in what was at that point of time called East Pakistan, after the partition, Bangladesh was initially called East Pakistan. The Muslim majority of that was dominated by Muslim majority, whereas West Bengal had Hindu majority at that point of time. So it was the cunningness of the British, and they wanted to break up the strength of the Indians, and they partitioned Bengal. They called it administrative convenience, but that was not the case. So there was a dispute in the members of the Congress, particularly the early nationalists, Dadabhai Naoroji, Surendranath Banerjee, and the later ones. Okay, so that is why this 23rd session was held twice. It was held again in 1908 once again. The assertive group was excluded from the Congress for nearly for a decade. The early nationalists, again, they always had the feeling that the British will not go away. The British will be there. And this country will be in British rule, but they wanted total independence. They wanted total Indian representation, India to be in the hands of Indians. That's what they wanted, though under the British, but the SRT group differed from them. So this was what happened there. There was a dispute there in the 23rd session, and it was only in 1916, that is the 31st session actually. Yeah, 1916, the 31st session, which was held in Lucknow under the chairmanship of Ambika Charan Majumdar. I have not reproduced this table here. Please note that the table is there in your textbook. The sequence of all the sessions you can see there at different places where it was conducted. Right up to the 54th session, it is there. So, okay. So, it was only in 1916 that the two wings of the Congress were united at the Lucknow session. See, ultimately, slowly, everybody was waking up to self-rule, that is Swaraj. So that is when they have compromised. Now, finally, here at the end of this chapter. So, what were the aims and objectives of the Indian National Congress during its formation in 1885? The initial objectives: promotion of close relations of nationalistic workers in different parts of the country, evolution and consolidation of a feeling of national unity irrespective of caste, religions, etc. Because the caste system, though the purpose it was there during the early ages, was totally different. In a modern world, a caste system has no place. So that discrimination due to birth had to go. So that was one more objective: consolidation of a feeling of national unity irrespective of caste and religion. Dear students, unfortunately, we may say this: we have gotten our independence, but in today's world, religion still matters, caste still matters. If you read during the elections, if you read the newspapers, if you follow the politics, there this we have not been able to take it out of our system. So we definitely, in the fight for independence, we got out of it. This caste did not matter. Hindus, Muslims, and all sections of the society they fought. But unfortunately, this is there. It caste does matter in politics even today, which is actually a sad state of affairs. But that is the truth. There are some truths because we as responsible citizens and you as tomorrow's voters and also the leaders of tomorrow, you also need to understand that this is there. It will not totally go away. Okay. Presentation of the third one was presentation of popular demands before the government, and the last one, training and organization of public opinion in the country. So even the British wanted this. They wanted what the common Indian, okay, reasonably educated Indian, what is it that they wanted the British to do? So that is why they also encouraged it. What was the public opinion of that time was what was to be presented through the Congress. So this brings us to the end of this chapter. Any doubts? You can call us on these numbers, or you can send a message in the Bhatt and Bhatt Tutorials mobile app chat section. Thank you.